down. So the who, what, where, when, why, and how is up top. You're trying to get all of the super relevant facts out right at the top with a snappy lead, something that is going to grab the reader's interest. Then there's what we call a nut graph, which basically tells the reader this is important because, and sort of puts it in a larger context. And then each succeeding paragraph after that contains slightly less important information. The idea is that you'd be able to cut the story from the bottom and without losing key information. That's what your pitch or press release should look like. Because any reporter you talk to these days, maybe only excluding those at the very top of the media food chain, like the Times or the Post or CNN, all of these people are overworked and underpaid. There are so many fewer journalists out there working today than there were 10, 20, 30 years ago. It's almost ridiculous. They don't have a lot of time. They are expected to churn out a lot of content uh, every day just to basically tread water. And so you basically need to present a story to them almost fully baked. They may or may not rewrite or re-report parts of it themselves. Hopefully they will, because you want them to be genuinely interested. But you need for them to feel like some of the work is already done for them. And in explaining that to them, reporters get a bad rap. I like to say, I went from journalism to the only thing that people like less, which is politics, right? But journalists generally get a pretty bad rap, but they are looking for some sort of friction, some sort of conflict, maybe even some sort of outrage, because it's not sensationalist per se. That's not the way that they're approaching it. It's just their natural instinct because it's easier to write. People will be more interested in reading it if there's something in it that sort of catches their attention and makes them want to read more, either because they're happy or sad or whatever. If you can get them feeling that something is unfair or not right, that's half the battle. And I think you guys are coming from a situation or a set of situations where that is often the story. So you want to try to convey that as clearly as you possibly can. And in doing that, you want to offer them both a local source who can speak to the immediate story, and hopefully also a state or regional or even national source who can place it into the bigger context for them. If it's television, they must have some sort of visuals, someplace nearby that they can go and shoot B-roll, of something happening, even if the interview itself isn't necessarily live on camera, if you're doing it by Zoom or something like that. If it's radio, please forgive the thumping that you may hear in the background. My cats are jumping in and out of a box just off screen here. If it's radio, they need sound. You can't just give them a printed quote and have them read it, basically. They need not only your voice, hopefully, but think about whether there's anything other than your voices that they can record that helps them tell the story to a bigger audience. You can use a media monitoring service. Most of these cost subscription fees, like Cision or Muck Rack or something, to find newsroom contacts, figure out who you're going to pitch. But honestly, some careful Googling will usually do the trick. Most organizations still have staff lists with emails and phone numbers on them. And sometimes those are actually more updated than some of the paid media contact services. So doing a little bit of research up front is really good. And that's important because you have to know who you're pitching to. Don't just email everybody at a certain news organization. That is a sure way to either end up in their spam folder just right out of the box, or it's easier for them to ignore if they see that you sent this basically to people who are not covering. A sports reporter or a food writer is not going to care about the story that you're pitching, most likely, right? So you want to find the people who have already reported on issues at least adjacent to what you're talking about. and always try to ping the metro editor or city editor, somebody in newsroom management, because if a reporter is off that day, or if a reporter just has too full a plate or something like that, if you catch the editor's attention, they will assign it to somebody. Very important to do that when you're dealing with TV or radio, because with this enormous downsizing of journalism over the past couple of decades, very few TV and radio stations have beat specialists anymore who only do a very narrow sort of realm of reporting. Most broadcast journalists are generalists at this point. They're on general assignment. And so you want to make sure that if you're contacting TV or radio, you're looking for the assignment editors and the producers, because they will actually be the ones who will feel the interest and then find a reporter who can do it basically within their organization on any given day.
Yes,
Somebody had submitted a question in advance about having a media kit, and I'm a big fan of the media kit. You know, media kit is something that you just have on offer that you can either post on a website or send to media organizations so that they have all they need to know about you in advance. It needs to explain who you are and what you stand for. So you need the full name of the organization, a brief, clear mission statement, not something that's all sort of, you know, blue skied and vague, but specifically what it is your organization does and hopes to do. A logo, if you have one, high resolution. Contact or contacts, and those have to have a full name, a title, a phone and or an email, depending on how you want to be contacted, a photo, you know, which would be a solid headshot, hopefully not something super candid, you know, like, you know, but something that's a little bit more sort of, you know, just like a portrait type thing, also high res, and a 2 or 3 sentence description of who you are, you know, of why you're involved in the issue and that. And then the final element of your media kit should be 3 or 4 of the best clips of coverage that you've had, the best interviews that have been done in the past that you feel best represent your side of the issue that you're talking about. As to who your contacts should be, you're the best judges of that. Pick someone who has some sort of leadership role, if you can, either at the local or state or national level, because, you know, that way the reporter feels like they're dealing with somebody. I know it's difficult in a volunteer organization, but dealing with somebody in a position of some authority and knowledge. And you want to try to, you know, your Venn diagram should be somebody with a leadership position, somebody who's comfortable doing interviews, you know, who's sort of a little extroverted, right? And who will be available most of the time, because the worst thing you can do is offer a contact who doesn't respond to an email or a phone call. You know, because reporters will immediately lose interest if they tried to reach out to you and couldn't get you. Should we pause here before I go into how to be interviewed, or should we continue on?
Yeah, let's just pause for a second. Does anybody have any questions at this point?
When were you with the Express Times in Easton?
I was in Easton from 92 to 97. It was my first permanent full-time job out of college, not counting a couple of miserable weeks in Waterbury, Connecticut.
Oh gosh. Well, there's a lot of the victims from Northampton County, Monroe County, and York County, and all those people there. So you might be familiar with the area.
Oh, I worked first in downtown Bethlehem, and then for most of the time I was there at the Express Times offices in downtown Easton. I lived in Allentown.
Oh gosh.
For those 5 years. So yeah, I'm familiar. I still have a lot of friends back there, actually.
Oh wow.
10 years overdue for my latest visit. So
Allentown, then Walnutport before. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, really great people. There are really great people. It's a nice area for sure.
It was a great place, especially being from New York and having been out in the Midwest for college. It was cool to be able to get to my parents' house in 2 hours flat if I wanted to go home and visit,
Yeah.
but not too close. An hour north of Philly. Yeah, it was a good situation. So.
Josh, it's Linda. I have a quick question. One of the problems I have when I try to contact the media is there are so many problems. And the current one is we have leaks. The property manager doesn't respond. The president did not want to be contacted. And I understand why. There's too many emails.
Right.
And then then they're not holding meetings, so there's not a chance to tell people. How do you force rank some of the things to tell the media about, or do you do a series of emails? I mean, the communication problem is one, the leaks are another, the displacement costs are a third.
I think you want to try to summarize and do it in as few emails as possible. Most reporters would like to get sort of an overview of the story up front rather than having to sort of draw it out. You can always go into more detail later, perhaps, but try to identify the few most egregious parts of the situation and get them on the hook with that. And then, once you're already into the conversation with the reporter, you can say, and here's some more detail about this, and here's some more detail about that. It's like fishing. Get them on the hook first, and then,
Good.
How do you get around their problem with advertisers? I found that with the media in some states, and especially in North Carolina where we are now, that they don't want to touch the stories because of their connections and their advertisers. I mean, you have community managers who run ads on TV all day. They know the problem. They know what the issue is. NPR in Charlotte did actually an interview, a really good coverage of it.
because they don't have advertisers, right?
Well, wait a minute. But you know what? I know the head of NPR in Wilmington, North Carolina. He's an incredible guy. I worked with him for 6 years on the sex abuse scandal with the schools. Where's the documentary coming? I know he's a wonderful man. He's also a former New Yorker. He used to teach at Manhattan College. Brilliant guy. And he just, they won't touch it because they do have commercials. And I think that's appalling. And I know people in the media, and I get so disappointed with them because they won't cover these stories. I mean, they wouldn't even cover, I was shocked. Spectrum News covered the North Carolina Select Committee on HOAs the second time. The first one is 2010 through 2012. But the Spectrum media covered, because I have family members from Charlotte who called me, but they wouldn't touch it in the coastal communities where this growth is so just incredible. And I get disappointed because I know the people. And I'm like, you know the problem. You know what they're doing to vulnerable populations. And it's almost like, getting over that hump of their advertisers as opposed to what the public needs to know, and.
Okay, we don't want to hold them up too long, but so do you have any thoughts on that, Josh? Like how?
Yeah, I mean, just briefly, I can honestly say that I feel very lucky that this is not a problem that I ever had. At the newspapers I worked at, I never had the advertising department or the publisher, stop or kill or forbid a story. Now, I think this probably is more common the smaller you get because the revenue issues are much more acute.
Right. Yeah.
Everything's a little closer together. There's not as much of a wall between advertising and the publisher's office and the newsroom. I don't have great advice for overcoming that other than persistence, and also think about competition. That every reporter everywhere feels like they're in competition with some other news source. And that can be a big motivating factor for people. If they think they're going to get scooped on something, they may be more, inclined to do it. So, it's a little bit of a poker game on your part, but you can think about, whether you actually can give this to somebody who's competitive with that reporter and sort of, stoke those flames, or you can bluff and say that, wouldn't, well, I'd hate to see your competitor at outlet X get this before you do. And just sort of see, I wouldn't lead with that. I would try the above board way first, but if you're just not getting anywhere, you can always try an approach like that. Let's get into the interview stuff, because I have a little bit of stuff I want to cover here, because I think some of it is not quite as intuitive as you think. I think the very most important thing about doing an interview with any journalist is that you set the ground rules first before the interview starts. This is very important. Most conversations you have will be on the record for attribution. And what that means is they can quote you and they can attribute it to your name. If for some reason it's not, you must make sure that is understood and verbally agreed to at the start of the interview before you say anything else. You are on the record unless you and the reporter have both already agreed otherwise. All right. You cannot make a statement and then try to say, oh, that's on background only. Don't quote me on that. No dice. If you have said it and you haven't set a ground rule first, it is fair game. They are not burning you. They are just doing their job at that point. So if you want to speak to somebody off the record or not for attribution on background, remember that different journalists have slightly different definitions for what those things mean. Most often, not for attribution means comments can be directly quoted. They can put quotation marks around something you say, but you can only be identified in general terms. Like, for instance, one of my people might be a technology insider, or a lawyer who's familiar with the field or something like that. You and the reporter would have to agree in advance what that attribution would be. All right. When you say on background, most people say that's the same as not for attribution. Others say that this means the reporters can only paraphrase what you say and not actually put quotes around it. And off the record usually means not for publication, though the reporter can use that information by verifying it some other way, right? Either finding it in documents or verifying it with another source. It's better not to use those terms. It's better to spell out exactly what you mean. You can't use my name. You can only call me an expert at a tech nonprofit. No names, no direct quotes. This is only for your own edification, and you'll have to find someone else to confirm or explain it on the record. And until they agree to that, don't say anything. All right. If they won't agree to it, then just stay on the record. Don't say anything that you're not willing to see in print or on the air. That's the way it has to be. Once those ground rules are set, you can relax a little bit, because most reporters are not going to be coming to you with gotcha questions. Most of them honestly just want to understand how something works, what the underlying principles of the story are. They're looking to you for help. They're not trying to trip you up. Except for those rare occasions when they are trying to trip you up and they are coming for you a little bit. And you'll have a pretty clear sense of that, if not from the initial setting the ground rules phase, then after the interview starts. If you're getting that feeling that you're getting in over your head, it is okay. It is preferable for you to beg off. Let me get back to you about that. I need to look into that a little bit more. Or, oh, gee, I have to take this call. Let me get back to you. Or, whoops, my cat is on fire. I gotta go. Whatever it takes to get you out of a bind, if you feel like you're getting into a bind. Then discuss among yourselves before re-engaging whether you want to re-engage with that person. It's much better to stop an interview before the damage is done than to try to unwind that damage afterward, right? Don't be afraid to walk away if you feel like you have to. I don't think that's going to happen to most people very often. And not in the context that you guys are talking about doing interviews. I do believe that most of the interviews you get, you're going to be dealing more with sort of honest broker people who just need some sort of explanation of what's going on. Before you get on the phone or on camera, make some notes. The top few things you want to convey in the words, close to the words that you want to see them reported. What is the quote? What is the soundbite that you want them to take away? Write a few of those talking point bullet points out for yourself. Also, on a separate card, which you will then throw away, write down the things that you absolutely don't want to say. The things that you don't want to get cornered into admitting or saying or whatever. It's good to write those down just as a mental exercise. It helps you crystallize what you want to avoid. So in the moment, you don't get caught up and actually go someplace you don't want to go. Just make sure you know which card is which before you go into the interview, right? Speak as normally as humanly possible. Avoid jargon, avoid acronyms. Nobody wants to see an alphabet soup of acronyms in a quotation. Don't be afraid to dumb it down, so long as it's still factually accurate. You are communicating to a lay audience. Even if you're talking to a law savvy or real estate savvy or whatever savvy reporter, you're not really talking to the reporter. You're talking to the reporter's audience, and those are lay people. And you want to keep it as simple as you possibly can for them. Speak slowly. Don't be afraid to take a breath and gather your thoughts. It makes you look thoughtful, to be honest. It doesn't come off as, as being slow-witted or anything like that. It actually accrues to your advantage. They're probably taking notes and will appreciate the help anyway. Throw a little filler in there. That's a good question. And that buys you a couple of seconds, right? To sort of take a breath and think of how you want to attack the next sentence that's going to come out of your mouth. Don't be like Michael Scott on The Office, where you start a sentence and you really don't know where it's going to end, right? That's where you get into trouble. An interview is a conversation. Reporters are going to come with a list of questions, but hopefully they'll digress to follow up on good answers that you've given. That provides you an opportunity to direct the conversation where you want to go. And that means learning to pivot. Answer the question you want to answer, not necessarily the one that you were asked, right? That goes back to those talking points, those bullet pointed notes that you made. This is something that you sort of develop muscle memory for over time. It takes a little bit of practice. But there's often a way to start out answering the reporter's question, but then swerve. For example, but the important thing to remember is, or really, the bigger picture here is that, and then you go back to what you wanted to say in the first place. That is the stock in trade of talking to the press. I hate to admit it, and a reporter may try to steer you back, but and if you can answer their question very directly, you should, but then don't be afraid to pivot back to what you wanted to say in the first place. Get your soundbite in there. All right, come hell or high water. A good interviewer, one of the best tricks that I ever learned, and luckily it was pretty early in my journalism career, and I ended up using it a lot, is you wait for the person you're interviewing to finish talking, and then you say nothing for a moment or two. You're taking notes, or you just sort of like stare at them for a couple of seconds. Nature abhors a vacuum, right? That silence is very uncomfortable. And that's the moment in which an interview subject will sometimes say something more spontaneous, sometimes more quotable from the reporter's position, but sometimes in your haste to fill that silence, you're saying something that you didn't actually mean to say, or saying it in a way that you didn't mean to say it. So if you're done saying what you wanted to say, if you got your soundbite, your bullet point out there, just hush. Wait for the next question. Don't feel obliged to fill the silence. That's on the reporter, not on you. All right. And quickly for on-camera interviews, you know, for Zoom, you want to have the camera at eye level, sort of like I do now. It's hard to tell when we're in the chairs like this. But I put a couple of books under my laptop to sort of elevate it. And then I have a screen on behind my laptop where I have my notes for all the stuff that I'm saying right now. And so you don't want to have to be looking away or down or far off to the side a lot to consult whatever notes you have. Optimally, you want to have the notes pretty clearly in your head, and you want those little bullet points and talking points to be brief enough so that you can remember them without a note card or a couple of lines on the screen. But if you do have them written down in some way, have that writing as close to the camera as possible, at the top of the screen that you're using for the Zoom, or on a screen right behind it, or on an easel right next to it, so that your eyes generally are focused on the camera more than anything else. There's a great Twitter account, and I don't say that often because I've become less of a fan of Twitter as time has gone by. But there's a Rate My Skype Room, and you can tell how old it is because it uses Skype, which basically assesses how good people look in Zoom interviews. It looks at all the stuff around and behind them. And on a scale of 1 to 10, sometimes they get a little snarky, sometimes they get a little political, but generally they have good points on the composition of what you want to have, right? You want to have some, you want to be relatively close to the camera so that you're not a tiny little bobbing head in a big frame, first of all. And a TV reporter will tell you if you need to move closer to the camera, but you'll want to be relatively close up. Don't have a wall right behind you. Have some sort of depth of field, because you know when you're doing it in a very confined space, it looks like you're doing a proof of life video, and it makes people very uncomfortable. It's off-putting to viewers. Try to have some sort of detail, some sort of books or framed art or plants or whatever in the frame behind you to provide a little bit of color, a little bit of texture, but not like a massive distraction. Make sure you're not backlit. Don't sit with your back to a window or a bright light, though. That is a no-no. And again, a TV producer or reporter will probably tell you if that's a problem, but you just want to be prepared not to be in that position. Muted but direct lighting is the best way to go. You don't have to invest in a ring light, you know, which is a circular light that you can buy and sort of have behind your laptop that'll put a very, very even sort of glow on you. You don't need that, you know, unless you're doing interviews like every single week. It's not necessary, although they're cheap. So, you know, if you feel the urge, you can always order one on Amazon. Dress professional but casual. You don't have to wear a tie and a jacket, but you don't want to be wearing a t-shirt either, probably. Avoid plain bright white or complex patterns because they don't often, they might not do all that well on camera. They might cause some either glare or effects that you don't particularly care for. So simple but professional is the way to go. All right.